it's Matt again from MDW GuitarWorks, and today I'm going to walk you through how I built this lyre. It's an Anglo-Saxon / Nordic style lyre from many sources that document it to the Middle Ages, and it's a very simple instrument in a lot of ways because it's basically just a harp. It's got strings on it, and there's no frets or anything. They just play what they're tuned to, and you don't stop the strings with frets. You do, however, reach through this hole here, and you can stop the different strings with your hand, or pluck different strings with your hands one way or the other. But anyway, I'll get to that. We'll play it a little bit, but first let me walk you through how it all went. First thing I did was I found pictures of a lyre that was excavated in the Sutton Hoo excavations around World War II, around that period, which was a Saxon burial, and it's pretty well documented as to what it was and how big it was. And then I found a picture of the reproduction. It's obviously not the original musical instrument. It was a reproduction. In the National Trust collection, they did a pretty meticulous reproduction of it in materials that would have been consistent with the time period. I forget what woods the reproduction was made of, but it's not what I used. I used plywood and MDF, which is basically kind of a sort of particle board, because I wasn't making an entirely acoustic instrument. I'm making an electric lyre. So anyway, the measurements of the reproduction are about 780 millimeters by 230 millimeters by 27 millimeters, or 30 inches, maybe 30 3/4 inches long, 9 just a tick inches wide, and a little more than an inch thick. And mine, because I wanted to make it an electric instrument, I left a little extra thickness because I wanted my controls to have plenty of room inside. So I made it about as thick as you'd make your average electric guitar. One thing I might consider doing differently in the future is go with a lighter plywood, and MDF might have been too dense of a choice, simply because it's pretty heavy. It doesn't really impact the playability, but it's a little heavy. Anyway, so first thing I did was I drew on my wood the shape that I wanted, and then I conveyed that onto the 3 different layers of 1/2 inch ply and the 2 layers of 1/4 inch MDF that I'm using. And then you roughly cut them to shape. Since I've got a fairly low power router, I don't want to be taking off more material with that router than I absolutely have to, because, well, it doesn't like that, and it likes to doesn't kick back, but it gets overwhelmed, and then I have to take the battery out and let it sit on the charger for a little while. And so you always want to route off as little material as possible, but that means you need to be pretty accurate with your jigsaw. So same thing in the next picture. Then I started routing the layers to shape. The first one I just cut real accurately and sanded it down to the shape that I needed, and then I used that as the routing template. So routing the layers to shape. And then I started gluing up the layers. You'll notice that there are actually 2 big holes through all the plywood sections. That's where the what little sound chamber it's going to have, and the control panel and all that good stuff is going to go. So the final glue up. since I didn't have any kind of issues with making a neck pocket or anything, I could just glue this all together all at one go. So then I put a beveled edge all around the outside and the inside. In this case, it was a 3/8 inch radius. And then I started sanding, and I sanded, and I sanded, and that's always a long process, but you know, the more time you put into sanding, the better you're going to end up satisfied with your product. That's just no two ways around that. Let's see. Then I sketched out the shape for the bridge and the tailpiece and the nut. The nut was just a dowel that I had laying around. It's a nice hardwood dowel, so good dense material. I didn't feel the need to make it metal or anything, just as long as it's nice and dense. The bridge was just sawed from some hardwood stock that I had laying around, and mostly just jigsawed and bandsawed, or not bandsaw, I wish I had a bandsaw. Jigsawed that out and belt sanded to shape. And the tailpiece, actually found this piece of scrap metal laying on the ground at work that happened to be about the right thickness and size. So I cut that out and belt sanded that into shape. And it's important that the tailpiece is ferrous or magnetic, you know, basically some kind of steel or iron, because that's also where the ground wire is going to go. And if you're going to have a magnetic pickup in your instrument, you're going to need to ground it to something, especially if you're going to want controls to work. Like your volume knob isn't going to work if it's not grounded to something. Let's see. Then I put a base coat of a nice gloss black paint. That's just the base. Most of it's getting covered up. And I went over it with a metallic gold paint that I used a sponge to apply. And then I shaped the nut and glued that in place. I used some quickset epoxy in this case, but really anything would have worked. Wood glue would have worked. Put the nut in place, and I was considering placement of the tuning pegs in there because, you know, I didn't want the nut too close to that. I wanted to have enough distance between the tuners and the nut to actually have an angle of the string going over the nut. I've learned that one the hard way. So yeah, and I attached the tailpiece with the ground wire under it. The bridge is a floating bridge. It's not attached, although, you know, at some point I could glue it down, but, you know, the strings hold it where it needs to be. And considering that I've got a pickup on there and not a whole lot of room between the pickup and the end of the instrument, you know, I don't have a whole lot of different options for moving that bridge. On some historic examples, the bridge might be a little bit higher than on this one, you know, closer to the access hole. But considering that this is an electric instrument and it doesn't really have an effective sound chamber, I wasn't too worried about it. And this gives me the longest expanse of string possible, which may or may not contribute to the tone, I don't know. But that's kind of where I ended up putting it. Let's see. Then I was getting ready to put the tuning pegs in there, or you can call them zither pins. They're the same thing. And they're a real good option for any kind of instruments that you might be making where you're experimenting, because they're cheaper than machine heads like guitar tuners, and you know, you don't have to worry as much with different access from the rear, like on the headstock of a guitar or something, you got to figure out how the gear part is going to go in and how it fits. Well, these are a lot simpler, and it's an older technology, and they are all still used on a lot of instruments like auto harps and zithers, and even a lot of regular harps will use these. The only drawback to that is that you do need a little tool to turn them, and just one of those things, if you lose your tool, you're kind of out of luck, or because you can't finger tighten these pegs. It just doesn't work that way. However, a little bit of research has shown me that even the wooden friction pegs that were used on traditional old ancient um, lyres had a special tool, and it was wood, or bone or antler or something, but you actually had to use the little tool because the pegs are set so close together. It's hard to get your fingers in there to tighten them, and you need to put a little bit of force behind the turn. Um, and I just thought that was kind of interesting that even back in the day, because like on a fiddle, the pegs, you have enough room that you can get your fingers in there real good and firm and turn those. But on an instrument like this, they're close together. You can't get a lot of strength behind your turn there, so the tool comes in real handy. So anyway, so I made my first holes on a test piece just to make sure I had the right drill bit, because if your holes are too big and your zither pins don't have enough friction, they're just going to spin, and that doesn't do anybody any good. Um, One thing I decided to do once I figured out the exact drill bit was I put in all the zither pins and screwed them all the way in, just kept turning and turning until they were completely covered, or the threads were completely covered, and then I put the lacquer on there, which this doesn't have a real heavy coat of lacquer, but I just put on enough to create a protective coating so the paint doesn't easily get scraped off. But I put that in there, put the zither pins all the way in there, so that when I sprayed on the lacquer, the heads of the pins would get a little bit of lacquer on there, which would protect them from oxidation, but the threads wouldn't get anything on there. And I wouldn't get any lacquer inside the holes, which might screw them up. Don't want that. So essentially use the zither pins to mask off the holes. That's what I did. Let's see. Next I put on the strings, and currently I've got the bottom 4 strings from 2 sets of acoustic guitar strings. In retrospect, and in futurespect, if that's a word, it's not, but I will use lighter strings, like maybe I'll try the highest 4 strings of 2 sets of maybe electric guitar strings, so that I can tune them higher, because right now I've got the strings tuned to to roughly where they're comfortable tension wise, and I could go up or down quite a ways. This, I don't have to worry about a neck giving way or anything. So I'd have a long way I could go tuning up before the strings started to break, but I don't want the strings to be overly tight. They feel like they're at about the right tension, but this is just, it's lower than most examples of Nordic lyre that I've heard played. They're usually tuned considerably higher, which would mean that their strings, well, they're typically gut strings, or the modern equivalent to gut strings, and they're lighter gauge. So in the future, I might have this strung up with lighter strings, so it's more in the range of traditional lyre. So, but it's a learning experience, and I don't feel like going back and restringing the thing, because there's 8 strings on here, and that would be a pain in the butt. So let's see, what do we got? Then I installed the pickup, which in this case is a single coil rail style pickup that I got from MDW GuitarWorks, And if you want little bits and bobs of guitar building stuff, go see Mike. He's your guy at MDW GuitarWorks. Can't recommend him enough. In this case, I built a small riser base to go underneath the pickup to lift it up a little bit. And I also cut a piece of bar steel that I just picked up at Ace Hardware to make the strings even closer to the pickup. That's not absolutely necessary because the pickup worked just fine. I just thought I'd raise the magnetic field just that much more. And with the pickup being set up the way I did it, there's not a whole lot of adjustment. Like modern guitars, you can adjust the screws that'll lift the pickup. In this case, I didn't build it that way. I could have built it that way so it would raise and lower like a modern pickup, but I just didn't feel like doing it. So anyway, last step was involving, actually it wasn't the last step, the next to last step was installing the volume and tone and wiring everything up, which is more fun than ought to be allowed, but it is what it is. And then once everything was all together, it was finished. The only thing that I didn't have a separate picture of here is the straps that I put in. This is a shoulder strap, and this is a wrist strap. Put your wrist through here, and gives you kind of a little bit more control left or right while you're either plucking or muting strings. And then this shoulder strap here, just put that over there and run your hand through here, and it's very secure. It's not going anywhere. And you can even stand up to play it and bring it around where you can see everything. So let's see, got it plugged into my bench amp here. And don't expect any kind of fancy concert here. And it's a little out of tune here. Right now I've got it just tuned to a diatonic scale. It's a little rough on the tuning side there, and I've virtually never played one of these before. No, not virtually. I've literally never played one of these before. So now I'm trying the muting. You can mute this second, let the third one go. Okay. I had to figure out where I'm going to mute. This is one that you're just going to have to learn the chord positions. But, man, I wish I had my distortion pedal on here, because this is really capable of doing some awesome power chords, and that would make for some awesome like Nordic death metal or something. Don't let this lovely major key tuning fool you, because you can get some power chords going on this sucker. But my apologies for the poor playing technique, but so that's basically it. That's the Nordic Saxon Lyre. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and make sure that you click like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And I'll see you again the next time. Bye now.